Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where, yes, we talk about how technology is transforming multiple industries, but we also explore a human story behind those tech startups and try and learn and follow in the footsteps of those that have bravely navigated through uncharted digital waters before us. And for those reasons alone, I'm incredibly excited to get today's guest onto the show. And I hope you're going to come away from today's episode as inspired as I was. So Payman Taei is the founder of Visme, and right now it's a hugely successful company. But what many don't know is that it was actually bootstrapped on a 10K budget before it came one of the leading visual communication tools. But to be clear, this is not an overnight success story. It's actually taken him 18 years and plenty of painful mistakes to turn Visme into the success that we all know and love today. And what I love about conversations like this is all too often we judge our success by others that are succeeding and what we see right now. But of course, the real value is in that 10 to 20 year grind that gets you where you want to be, playing the long game. So enough for me. Let me beam your ears all the way back stateside so we can speak with Payman, founder of Visme. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name is Payman, and I'm the founder of Visme, married with a beautiful wife and a 3.5-year-old son, based out of the DC area here. So my career kind of started back as a web agency. I started back in 2001 doing websites, and then that led me eventually to creating a SaaS product, and then later on to this SaaS product, Visme. So that's, in a very quick nutshell, how it all came about.
And I'm excited to get you on the podcast today because you have an incredibly inspirational story that began being bootstrapped with only a 10K budget to becoming one of the leading visual communication tools in the world, used by 3.5 million users across over 100 countries. So we will have startup founders listening at various stages of their journey that could be scattered anywhere in the world. So can I take you back to where it all began and tell me about the actual inspiration behind Visme?
Sure. So the 3.5 is almost 4.2 now.
Wow.
In terms of how it all started, I pay my way through college. I started designing websites back all the way in 2001, 2000. And, I used to be a biology major. And so I got my bachelor's and decided not to go to graduate school, started doing websites, made it into a little freelance, and then eventually a small little agency of about 7 or 8 people in the peak of it in 2008, 2009. And Visme was kind of initially not made for non-designers. I initially made it for designers like myself. And so back in the day, a lot of the sites that I used to create, I love animation, so I used to do a lot of work in Flash. I'm not sure most people may remember it or not. And if you are new to the web in the last 10 years, you probably never heard of Adobe Flash, but basically all the interactivity and animation that used to happen pre-2012 and 11 was done using this technology, this software called Adobe Flash. And so it allowed you to create, animations, move objects around, create these, really cool web intros for websites and so on. And so that was using Adobe Flash. And then when iPhone came out and Steve Jobs decided that on the smartphones, on the Apple devices, they're not going to support Flash anymore. And so that pretty much killed Adobe Flash. And so as an experiment, I decided to, as an internal project, side project, I was like, okay, well, the fabric of the internet, the future is going to be based on HTML5. And even to this day, every website and web page you go, is pretty much still based on HTML. That's never going to go away. So nobody can get rid of it. Apple cannot come and say we're no longer support HTML5. It's just supported it. It's a fabric of the internet. And so decided to create similar functionality of Flash in HTML5 so that other designers could still continue animating and it would still work on a device such as iPhone and the others. So that's what initially it was made to be, is to be a kind of a side project for designers like myself to create little Flash, little animations similar to Flash. And what happened was I did a little focus group. This is back all the way in 2012, 13, and got a bunch of people together locally in the area, 13, 15 people. And actually, most of them were not designers. A few of them were. And put together and say, hey, what do you think of this tool? It was very buggy, very early stage. And I look back at what it looked like and I kind of laugh at it. It was a very simple MVP. And so what happened was I noticed that people don't really care so much about creating an animation, but they're trying to actually create a little presentation slideshow. They're trying to create a data visualization. And so right away that day, even though that focus group was a failure in one aspect, I quickly realized that this should be something different. And so went back to the drawing board and said, okay, me as an individual, I've had two frustrations. One frustration as a designer, and that is when I created designs, websites, web pages, web presentations for different clients, I had to use 3, 4, 5 different software. So let's say I'm creating a web page. I would have to go to Adobe Illustrator, create the icon, go back to, let's say, Photoshop, create as a graphic, and then go into, let's say, back into Adobe Dreamweaver or in Flash and put it together. So I'm using 3 or 4 different software, and every single one, even though it's from the same company, Adobe, the interface is different. They all work differently. So you're kind of, it's a broken system where you're going between one tool to another, and the workflow is very different. And so that's a frustration that I had. And so, the light bulb moment that went off was that, okay, there should be one tool that is one interface. So the workflow is the same regardless of what type of content you want to create, and it allows you to create all forms of different content. So whether it's a presentation or an infographic or a report or just a blog graphic, a social graphic, a short animation, there should just be one interface with very minor adjustments to it based on the content you're creating so that you always feel like home and it's easy to create. So that's what it turned out to be, is that Visme turned out to be, it's used right now, of course, by various companies and individuals, students, educators. Most of them are non-designers, but there are individuals that are designers and they're part of a company and they use Visme as a part of a team so that the designer can set brand guidelines and everybody else adheres to it and so on. So it's kind of going back where there are designers using it, but the main function and the core of it is that it's used by different people from all walks of life, and they have one common ground, and that is they want to create beautiful content, and they want to be able to do it quickly and easily with the least amount of friction. And so that's what Visme is today.
And just listening to the early part of your story there, I was getting a bit nostalgic thinking about GeoCities, Netscape Navigator and AOL. But I mean, you had that idea and then you bootstrapped to 10K. But what happened next and how did you progress forward?
So, before that, there was another tool that I'd created, and I used some of the funds from that to put that towards Visme, creating Visme. And basically, before this tool, with another challenge that I saw when I was doing websites was companies used to come to me and say, hey, you create a website for us, but I need to get in and update my About Us page and my team page, bio page, and so on. And back in the day, there was no WordPress. All the websites were static, were HTML-based pretty much. And there was no content management system, or if there was, you had to build it and it cost an arm and a leg. So I put together a very, very simple tool. It was just an HTML editor. That's what it was called. All it really was is, regardless of where your site's hosted, you just put your FTP information in. Basically, that's a means to access your website. And then in your browser, it would just load your page. It was not to create a website. It was just to edit the content of your existing page. And so that's how that started. And I went on, to generating reasonable revenue, nothing astronomical. And eventually I had to really take my focus away from that because more and more websites were WordPress based and so on. And so I knew that tool is not going to be needed at some point. And and so the reason I'm bringing that up is that it was generating ongoing revenue, and I used that and also some of the agency funds that I was making between client projects, pretty much putting all the profits into Visme.
And for any startup founders that are listening here to the early stage of your journey, are there any tips for someone that's struggling to take their idea forward that you would possibly pass down to them?
That you can get different tips from different people.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, I don't think there's any straightforward answer to that. It's every product can work a little bit differently. Every industry is different. Every product, use case is different. However, I think in general, if it's a software or if it's a service that you provide to people, you have to realize that is there a need for it? The answer is yeah, there is a need, and you feel strongly about it. You got to build it so that people can actually use it, right? And I think there has to be a balance between, MVP, minimum viable product. Sometimes people say, well, create a MVP and just put it in front of people. In our case, in case of Visme, an MVP was over a year and a half of work because it's a massive product. It's almost like creating PowerPoint, and yet it's also a design tool, and it comes with all sorts of icons and templates and graphics and so on. So there's so much that goes behind it. So the MVP took a long time to create. But an MVP for other products could be very simple. It could be, let's say, Dropbox. It was a simple storage device, so that could be built in a matter of weeks or a few months. So it just depends on what you're creating. But I think the key point is that you have to find out, is there an audience, and how is your product different than somebody else? Because if all you're doing is just copying another product, another competitor, you're just like them. You're nothing different, and they probably already have an edge over you. They're already further along, more users, revenue, and so on. So you have to come with something that is unique and differentiates you. It doesn't alienate people in that it's still, like, for example, in our case, if you use PowerPoint and you use Visme, you're still going to feel at home. But what differentiates us is that we give you lots of assets, lots of templates. We give you some abilities to create interactive content and, more transitions and auto animated presentations, for example, and ability to brand manage and lock slides so your team members can't edit certain content and blah, blah, blah. So there is differentiator factors on it, but you don't want to just come around and just create something that is just totally different than what people are used to using.
And after over 1,000 interviews on this podcast with tech leaders, I always like to think that we're all in charge of our own destiny. But it often seems from the kind of lessons that I've learned from the guests that I've listened to on here is how very often they have like a random conversation or an encounter with someone at the exact right moment in time to have that right conversation. It almost feels like the universe has given them just a little bit of nudge in the right direction at the perfect moment. So I've got to ask, during your career, is there any funny or interesting stories that have happened to you since you began leading your company?
Well, let's see. I guess I could talk about the initial focus group that I had. It was a complete failure, right? I had 15 people, 17 people show up. And it was embarrassing, actually, because the tool it wasn't even loading in some of the laptops that people had brought in. You couldn't even load it, and it just wasn't working in half of them and so on. It was just a disaster. But still, what I noticed, a few people that ended up using it was what they were trying to do. So I think that was kind of a funny, embarrassing, moment. And the other part would be is Visme wasn't called Visme to begin with. It was called EWC Presenter. I look back and I just laugh at what kind of a stupid branding was that? So the EWC was for Easy Web Content. Basically, the company name, our formal entity, is Easy Web Content. And how that came about was that tool that I created over 10 years ago, that HTML editor. That's what it was. It was called Easy Web Content, to edit your content easily. And so the EWC was short for that, and presented was a product of it. So very dumb marketing. And I'm glad that we eventually landed on the name Visme. It took a while to decide on the name and so on, trademark it, and, we own it and so on.
And you've enjoyed an 18-year overnight success story. So what kind of mistakes and challenges have you had to overcome to get where you are now? I must imagine there's quite a few of them, but is there any that really stand out?
Well, I think that kind of speaks for itself, right? 18 years. So definitely wasn't overnight success. Many, many mistakes made along the way. I think there's been a lot of trial and errors, still trying to figure things out. I can clearly say that, and from the other side, it may seem kind of like, well, he's figured out and they know exactly what they're doing. Yeah, we have a very clear direction, and I know what we need to do to further succeed and grow Visme and take care of our users and so on. However, it's been full of failures and trial and errors, and it's been to figure out what things work. And so that 18 years even, running HindSite, the web agency, HindSite Interactive, from 2000 till the last few years ago, it's no longer really active. One thing that I can say was that a mistake or a challenge that I came by was to kind of not evolve and not change. The wave was coming, and that wave was, hey, WordPress is going to be the content management system that most sites are going to be powered by. You can't just create your own CMS and force people to use it, because that's a wave that you can't stop. It's open source. Second was, in terms of Flash, I saw the signs coming, or I had a couple of designers tell me, hey, 2 years before that whole wave came where, Apple decided to stop using it. And one of the designers I recall clearly said, hey, listen, HTML5 is the future, and here's some of the content and articles. And I was so sold and so in love and used to using Flash, I was like, that's never going to go away. So it did. And I guess the one thing that I learned over years was that you have to constantly evolve. You have to be open to adjusting and modifying and changing. And there's only one thing for sure in business, or I guess in life, is that things are going to change. And so you just need to be ready to kind of stay, I don't want to say ahead of the curve, but move with it.
And here in 2020, Visme is now a top visual communication tool used by over 4.2 million users from over 100 countries, including leading non-profits and Fortune 500 companies that include big names such as IBM, WorldBank, Capital One, and General Dynamics. I could go on. But can you tell the listeners a little bit more about exactly what Visme is and the kind of problems that you're solving for your customers, just for people that are hearing about it for the first time?
Sure. So the best way I could explain it is it's an all-in-one visual communication tool. And the content that most people create these days, visual communication, I mean, kind of going back to our ancestors, we used to communicate with, glyphs and, little pieces of drawings and so on back in the day before language came along, right? And it's been proven time and time and over again that people have a tendency to absorb information or content in a visual manner. So charts versus, let's say, looking at a spreadsheet, or an image with maybe supported by a text on a slide versus just the text itself with no slide to support it, the visual to support it. And so what Visme is an all-in-one visual communication tool. The best way I could explain it is that if you take PowerPoint, the key features of PowerPoint, and you marry it with a design tool and also combine it with a repository such as Google Drive, what you have is Visme. So that whether you want to create a presentation, whether you want to create a chart, a map, a social graphic, a full-blown infographic with data that you're visualizing and so on, you use this one tool called Visme, and everything is there. All the icons you need, the graphs, images, videos, data visualizations. We give you all of those things in front of you so that you don't have to start creating them from scratch and templates. And if you do need to have your own logo and your own images and your own fonts and so on, we have business plans that allows you to have your branding requirements, to upload your own images and your own assets and videos and audio and so on and so on. So it's that's what in essence it is. And companies, why do they decide to use our tool versus another? Is because we give you a great starting point, and the tool is made to be easy enough that anybody can use it. And yet it goes beyond a very dumbed down tool where it's just been so limited that you can't take it one step further. So in Visme, whether you want to create a very basic, quick presentation or graphic, you can do that. And if you want to just go all the way, combine interactivity or an animated, had pop-ups and rollovers on link slides, the web pages, blah, 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 you can do that. It just depends on how far you want to go.
And as someone that creates vast quantities of content from this daily tech podcast to my written columns, I want to get better at actually repurposing content and visually bringing some of it to life, especially when we're sharing it over multiple channels. But can you walk me through how to actually get the most out of Visme, and also how businesses can translate that boring data into stunning presentations or infographics that are fit for a much more visual web now?
Yeah. So, let's say that if it's a data visualization, we give you a number of different charts for larger pieces of data, values and so on, bar charts, pie charts, scatter plots and so on. And then if you just want to visualize very small stats and figures, percentages, creating a array of data, like for example, X percent of females versus males, or work at this company and so on. Those simple stats and figures, you can visualize those. We have created exclusive to Visme these variety of data widgets. So all you do is just drag and drop them and just apply your value to them. So that's in terms of creating that. And the template selection is very vast. And so you don't have to, for example, search for, say, okay, I'm in the medical industry and I want to create a presentation and look for a medical industry presentation. In Visme, we don't do that. In terms of the presentations, we give you these slide themes. So for example, we have a modern, and soon we're going to have a simple and a creative theme made up of hundreds and hundreds of slides across 20 different categories. So all you do is you create the structure of your presentation, regardless of what industry and so on you are. So agenda, and then comparison, and thank you, and pros and cons, all those different slides, regardless of what industry you are. And you just put them together, and all you do is then just go and just easily, quickly edit the values and numbers and so on. So, that's the way that you get the most out of Visme, is that you use the assets that we provide you. And then when you do need to kind of customize or add something very specific on your own, if you ever need to do that, you can kind of upload that yourself as well.
And it does feel that businesses now have more data on their hands than ever before, and they also want to make data-driven decisions as a result. So I'm curious, are you finding that data visualization has actually entered the mainstream now, and in ways that it never was before?
I think so. I think so. And I think when people hear data visualization, they imagine these very complex and large numbers that are extremely hard to understand and so on. There's tools such as Tableau, which is very popular, great tool for large data visualizations, that you could utilize. But most people, the data that they need to visualize information might be, let's say, it's for internal use for HR. Hey, how did our quarter go last quarter? And it might just be a matter of stats and figures, little bar charts and so on. And so you can combine those to create this little report. And so those are, becoming more and more mainstream now between companies or even the educational sector and so on. I would say is data visualization comes at different levels, dealing with smaller numbers and data or dealing with very, very large data visualizations. I think the lower end, the first, is becoming much more mainstream now.
Now, none of us, of course, are able to achieve success without some help along the way. So I'm curious, is there a particular person that you're grateful towards who helped you get where you are today? Or is there anyone out there?
I would say, there's been more than one, but I'll probably, give credit to my dad. An aspect of, me coming from the Middle Eastern culture, from Iran, you're usually it's kind of instilled in you traditionally that go become a doctor or a lawyer or engineer and so on. So you're going to go work for someone else because you're guaranteed a salary. So my dad is also a small business owner. And so, his, thought was, you really like what you're doing, and it's not going to hurt anyone, do it. So that was that. And also there's a designer named Kevin back in the day when I didn't know what the heck I was doing, because I was a self-taught designer when I started doing websites. I used to tap into him for little tips and so on of how to use different tools. So, I would give some credit to him as well.
Fantastic. Well, a huge thank you for coming on and sharing your story with everyone today. But before I do let you go, can you just point everyone in the direction of where they can find out more details on Visme, give it a try, and equally, if they wanted to contact a member of your team, what's the best way of doing that?
Sure, absolutely. So you can just go to Visme, visme.com or .co. Either way, we'll take you to our website. And just want to note that we have been, over the course of, our tool is great right now, but we have been, over the course of the last year and a half, working on a major update to our system that is just a month away from going live, and is going to really transform visual communication to a different level. And that is going to be going live late February. So I think that is going to be a game changer. And so we're very excited about that. And so anybody that creates an account on Visme, you're going to be notified when that version goes live. And everybody that's a Visme user will be able to access that eventually. And in terms of reaching out to me and contacting me, the best way to reach me is through LinkedIn. And then you can just look me up, Payman, Payman, Taei, that is the last name. You'll be able to find me there. I don't think there's anybody else with my name on there.
And you've left us with a teaser as well. Now, the perfect way to end a podcast. But you really have been on an inspirational journey, a roller coaster ride, which all startup journeys are. And so much value and so many big takeaways there. So I'd love to stay in touch with you and maybe meet up again a little later on in the year when we find out more about that game-changing upgrade that you're doing. But more than anything, just a big thank you for taking the time to share your story with me today. Thanks again.
Absolutely, Neil. My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
What a great story there. I mean, whether you're a startup founder, movie star, athlete, rock star, or whatever it is, or you want to be, don't look at those people at the top of their game now and think, what can I do to be like them? If you really want to uncover the value, it's in the journey, the struggle. That's where the real winning is done. And here in 2020, Visme is empowering everyone to communicate visually. But it does feel like they were slightly ahead of their time, because now we all have mountains of data, and staring at a spreadsheet or death by PowerPoint just isn't going to cut it anymore. But the fact that they saw this moment coming is inspiring on its own. Because now we all want to bring data to life and have something visual that just hammers home the exact key messages and information from those complex data sets. So absolutely love what they're doing. But enough of my ramblings, please. Let me know your thoughts about the story, about Visme, or if you've got a similar story you want to share with me by emailing me directly, techblogwriter@outlook.com, or tweet me, contact me on LinkedIn, Instagram, wherever it is. Just look for me at Neil C. Hughes. And if you're interested in launching your own podcast or just want to outsource your business blogs or your CEO's tech thought leadership blogs, find out how you can work with me by looking on my website, techblogwriter.co.uk, where you'll also find over 1,100 interviews with other tech leaders and similar inspirational stories to the one we shared today. But that's it, I'm afraid, for today's episode. But don't worry, I'm going to be back tomorrow with another tech leader and another great story. So thanks for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.